Well, hi, Teresa. Hey, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Hi, Corey. Yes, I'm Teresa Hughes, Director of Sales and Marketing for the Inn at Virginia Tech and Skelton Conference Center, which is a hotel and conference center located on the main campus of Virginia Tech.
Go Hokies,
Uh,
right?
Go Hokies is right. Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
indeed. Well, hey, I've always appreciated our conversations we've had, since the several years we've been working together. And I've been looking forward to having you on the InSync show and wanted to talk a little bit about, this whole buzz of coming back to the office and in particular, new office etiquette in the age of remote work. So, I wanted to ask you, what are some of these changes that you've seen, and why should we really take notice?
Yeah, that's such a great question, a great topic, Corey, and I so appreciate you for allowing me to spend a little time with you today.
That
You know, there have been so many changes post COVID-19, and we've just kind of had to reimagine how and where work gets done. And so, as folks return to my office, and we are all back in the office, but we're working with a lot of folks that are not back in the office. So we have had to change some of our styles. For example, we have a lot of folks working in cubicle style offices.
uh-huh.
Well, a lot of our interaction is now Zoom, or Teams calls. So those virtual calls. So, I just think that you've got to be very conscientious about the noise and making sure that, you're wearing your headphones, or if you're not in a private office, you've just got to think of some things you probably didn't have to think about in the past. And the other thing I think is really critical, because we are doing so many virtual calls now, is that when you're on a call, unless you've got a great reason and you can explain that to the person or people that you're on the call with, I think it's really important that you show your face. Because if you were in an in-person meeting, you'd all be there looking at each other, you
Absolutely.
know. And I just think that is respectful and helpful to put names with faces if you happen to be talking to some folks that you haven't met before,
Right.
especially if you're with maybe working on a project with a team of folks, or
Mhm.
whatever the case may be. And as I say, there's always reasons. But what happens, I think, if you don't do that, is you tend to multitask.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
not 100% focused on that call because you're probably working in some other emails or doing something at your desk. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm wondering, is that almost a signal now? Because people are like, oh, now I see your avatar. You don't want to come on, you don't want to show your face. It's, do we now just think, well, you don't want to do that because we know you're working on something else? I mean, is that pretty much, that's a signal, right?
Yeah, I think it can be, not always, but certainly I think it can be. So I think that's important. I also think the other thing about being back in the office, even if you're back in your office, I think that um, things are more casual than
Mm.
they have been in the past. And then you're going to say, well, what does that mean exactly? I mean, if I go back to pre-COVID, and of course, even before that, I mean, it was all about making sure that, folks that worked in the office, you never knew when you might have a guest show up at your office, or, just folks that you may have to meet out in the general area, or if you're working in a hotel like I am. So your dress, your appearance was probably much more formal. But then after we stayed home for a little while, life changed a little bit and things became a little more casual. So I think that has come back to the office. And I think that's part of, what leadership has to recognize, that, maybe that's not the most important thing. Now, all that being said, you still have to be appropriate, of course, depending
Sure.
on where you work and the type of environment that you work in, but also think that things are more casual.
Yeah. So do you see that level of appropriateness mean in comfortability, and there's that delicate dance, right? And in fact, we just kind of touched on that even before jumping on our caller here. And I think I'd mentioned to you before is we were on these video conferencing calls even pre-COVID, but I definitely saw a trend in people that I knew prior to COVID and how they evolved, so to speak, into more of I saw their personality come out a little bit more, and not just even their attire, but their mannerisms. And I personally I welcome the change, because I felt that sometimes maybe they weren't being as authentic or as true to themselves as they could have been. And I definitely see a change for at least for the better on my side. And I know that it's a little bit different for you, because that coming back to the office, you see a lot more physical activity for sure. So
yeah, I totally agree with that. Leadership, and I think leadership recognizes that, and realizing that employees can be more productive and even more responsible.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. In fact, as you know, I had the pleasure of interviewing Damon Strickland, their GM.
Yes.
And I got the sense from our conversation, his style of management and leadership, and I think he's, he showed, he came on and said, I'm sleeved up with my tattoos, and I get the sense from our conversation he values people being who they want to be, and wearing that as a badge of honor on property. Do you get that sense versus maybe somebody that's been on the at the inn prior?
Oh, I absolutely do. Yeah, no question. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I just read the other day, Corey, and this is just one study, but the estimate, I hope have my memory is gonna get this right. There were 55% of workers are hybrid. So, wow. Some they're in the office 1 or 2 days a week, and they're working from home. The others, 25 to 30% are home full time, and 10 to 15% are back in the office. So even though I can appreciate being back in the office with a team of folks, the folks that we're calling on and working with, our clients, our customers, they're probably not back in the office, and they're working from home. And those are the folks where we used to be able to call on them personally, we're having to do virtual calls with.
Very good point.
So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. Now was that a stat in just the business culture overall, or is that in hospitality specifically?
Overall.
Oh, okay.
It was an overall stat. Yeah.
But I obviously a lot of meeting planners have made that transition. In fact, a lot of folks that used to work on property, I know personally, that are now with a third party or a meeting planner, are all remote. They don't even have a corporate office. So you're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So, what are some things that do you see some additional changes or variations coming down the aisle, so to speak, in the future?
I definitely think that what we're experiencing now, a lot of it's just our new norm. It's how it's going to continue to be. And I think that's okay, because we're getting used to it now. And in the hospitality business and in our hotel world, our group business isn't back 100% the way it was pre-COVID, but we're certainly tracking in that direction. And it's good to see. And I do think that, for those that do have the opportunity from home, that leadership does recognize that employees are productive and they are responsible and to work from home, and they've had the opportunity to prove themselves during the pandemic. And I just think that has changed the mindset that, of work doesn't have to be done in the office.
And as you know, coming from a marketing agency, which we've always embraced, we want your best caliber of work, not necessarily just checking off boxes like, did you do X, Y, and Z? And I love the discussion of leadership talking about a team of outcomes versus a task-driven mentality. And so even from our writers and people that work with Lure, if your best writing time is at 3 a.m. on the beach of La Jolla or whatever the case may be, so be it. I love that. And we embrace that. So it sounds like, well, in fact, that's one of the next follow-up questions for you would be, do you see these as positive changes like that, that you've noticed over the past couple of years?
I do. And I think that leadership is and will need to continue to develop these flexible work policy guidelines, if you will.
Yes.
They've got to embrace these work patterns. So if you're if you're being productive and responsible at 3 a.m. on the beach, then you're doing it, right?
Absolutely.
So I just think that that moving forward, I just think it's going to be more flexible work policy guidelines moving forward. Now that people have proven that they can do it.
Yeah, and it's as you mentioned, sometimes the best of people isn't 9 to 5. And I know that none of us really work 9 to 5 jobs anymore, but it's sometimes those that are a little bit, I use the word weird because I like people that are interesting and just different. And some of those people aren't, they don't fit into that confined box of a traditional 9 to 5 workplace. So I love that. I love thinking about how we can do things differently to get a better outcome versus, did you do task X, Y, and Z? Yes.
Yeah. Probably 20 plus years ago, Corey, I visited with a client and I'd never been to this office before. And at this office, they were a kind of a 24/7 that folks could come and go.
Oh, wow.
Anytime they wanted. So you would have folks come in the middle of the night, that 3 a.m. person, because they had a great idea. And they actually might even be in their pajama bottoms. They were very relaxed, very laid back. They had this offering. And I'm not talking about Google, but this is probably how Google was then and now. But, they had this big room where they had video games and refrigerators and cabinets full of food and refreshments. Wow. And so if somebody just needed to take a break, because they did come in at 4 a.m. and they really were productive and that worked, but they needed to take a break, they could go in there and lay on the couch and take a nap. They could go get a snack. They could play a video game with a coworker.
I love that.
It was just that flexibility.
Yes.
And then of course, leadership, knowing that was all part of who that person was and where their creativity was going to come from. And for me, of course, at that point, at that stage, I was just like a tourist in a big city. I was just walking around like, oh my goodness.
That is awesome.
So if you will, a little bit of that has become everyone's reality now, I think.
Yeah. Now you brought up a really good point. I wanted to ask you, do you see us looking at the KPIs or a person's productivity a little bit different? If we looked at these things differently, we might embrace some of these new changes. I'm assuming, because you had mentioned a very vivid new workspace that got my creativity flowing. It's like, wow, that place sounds really, really cool, where you had that flexibility and it was a culture of creativity and
freedom.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah. I definitely think that has been happening more and more over the years, even pre-COVID, but I think even more so now.
Wonderful. So what would be Teresa Hughes, secret sauce or takeaway you could share with us?
Gosh. Well, I guess one thing is what I mentioned earlier is when you are on those virtual calls, and I learned from someone wiser than me that it's critical to be there in person, so you can see each other. So I do leave that as one of my takeaways. The other comment that I would make, probably, so everybody in the country is suffering, trying to attract personnel,
Right.
And I guess, I just believe that to attract and retain talent, we have got to be flexible with work schedules.
Yes.
I really do, because that's what people are looking for now. Even people that didn't have it before,
right,
they're looking for it now. And so, I would leave you with that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think people, even those that did not experience that, we went through COVID. If there was any silver lining to this whole thing, and there were few, not many, but maybe it was that. As we talked about earlier, it was breaking down those traditional norms and exposing people, or let them experiencing things like freedom, flex work that weren't there prior to this. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think attracting top talent, people have the leverage now, and I think that's a trend that is going to continue to stay, and maybe even increase more.
Yeah, I think when talent sees that the leadership, that the employer really cares enough to be flexible about their schedule, allowing them to get their kids on the bus and not having to be regimented to that 9 to 5 time frame, that they can be a little flexible. I think that speaks volumes. And what that does is just, I think it drives you to be so much more productive and passionate.
Absolutely.
And loyal to what you're doing.
Absolutely. Because when that animosity sets in, and you no longer feel that sense of purpose any longer, they're not getting, and that's human nature. I think you're not giving the best that you could be, because you've built that wall of friction. And yes, as leaders, I think they're probably, I know the smart ones are recognizing that for sure. Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, hey, Teresa, I appreciate you spending a few moments with us. I always love our conversations, some very insightful, as I know you would. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us.
Corey, thank you. I always appreciate your good work. Take care.